Now, Daniel Pipes is recognised by neutrals, allies and even a few enemies, actually, as perhaps the most compelling and informed voice on the Middle East. Who better to ask about the Arab Spring, the future of the countries in the region, Iran included, than the man himself. Welcome to you, sir.
Thank you.
There are so many to talk about. Let's begin with not an Arab country, but Iran. So much has been happening. Your prediction?
Let me just go over a little what's been happening. Some of the Iranian parliamentarians are again threatening outside forces, the United States in particular, if they go into the Straits of Hormuz. The rial, the Iranian currency, is dropping further and further. It's cascading down. There's a sense of panic among Iranians that they're going to be attacked. The EU, the European Union, just today decided to enforce an embargo, not to buy Iranian oil, which is 80% of Iranian imports, financial imports. The U.S. has already passed such a bill. So things are really happening. And, well, you asked to predict. I don't think that economic sanctions will work in the end. I do think the Iranian regime is so determined to have nuclear weapons that it will do it regardless. And so I do think in the end, if we want to stop them, we'll have to use military force.
When you say we, are we talking about the United States, Israel, the European powers?
Well, us, the West, yeah. Most likely either Israel or the United States, yes.
What would the non-Persian Islamic countries, remembering that we're speaking of a Persian Shia power here, how would, I think I knew how Mubarak's Egypt would have reacted, but how would the new Egypt react? How will Saudi Arabia react? How will the other countries in the region react to this?
The key is Saudi Arabia because the Saudis alone have extra capability in the millions of barrels per day, and that will be needed because the Iranians export 4 million a day, and that's a lot to make up for. They're the second largest exporter in OPEC. So the Saudis have several million on hand, and then there are reserves that, for example, the U.S. government has and others have. So the Saudis are on board. They're saying that they will be there. They will provide the extra if it's needed, and that's the most important thing.
Right.
So I don't think we'll have a $200 or $300 per barrel.
Okay. Iran's former ally, Syria. This has gone on, the revolt and the oppression, I think, far longer than most people assumed it would.
It's heading towards a year now. Two major developments today. First, the Arab League has proposed a plan by which Bashar al-Assad would resign and have his vice president take over, and then there'll be elections and all sorts of developments, somewhat on the model that's been taking place in Yemen. Secondly, there is an independent town in Syria now called Zabadani. It's towards the Lebanese border, not that far away from Damascus. It's been out of the regime's control now for several days, and today they had a major demonstration, 12,000 people estimated, on the streets celebrating their freedom. This is potentially large. We don't quite understand why the town has not been taken back quickly, as other towns had been taken back quickly. Does this point to a dissension among the ranks in the Syrian military? Is there some change of policy? We can't tell. But it is remarkable that there is this exaltation on the part of the people who are out from under the regime's thumb.
Unlike Egypt, of course, this is a country of various minority groups, some of whom, and I really can understand their fear, are terrified of what would replace an Assad they don't admire, but at least understand gives them a certain protection.
No one likes the Assads, but they have provided a certain measure of stability, and particularly some of the minorities, Christian minorities, Alawite minority especially, which is what the Assad family is from, are very fearful about the future, and rightly so.
Yeah. You mentioned Yemen, which is a country that seems to pass a little below the radar of most people in the West, but this is a far larger, more populous and powerful country than many people assume. What is happening there right now?
Indeed, Yemen tends to be a country we have not paid attention to historically. It is a country of nearly 25 million people, so it's large in terms of population. It is a country that has a desperate quality to it in terms of economics and ecology. There could really be a humanitarian and political disaster in Yemen. And the big news today is that the president has left the country for the United States for ostensibly medical purposes. Now that brings to mind the Shah of Iran 30 years ago. Is this really the end of it for him, or is he going to be returning? It's too early to say. But he indicates he wants to return. It's temporary. At the same time, there have been major revolt in the military. Air Force bases have now declared their disloyalty to the regime, in part because it's a relative of the president's who runs the Air Force. So we're approaching an anarchic situation in Yemen that could have immense implications, not just for Yemen, but for the neighborhood, indeed the world, as I can imagine millions of penniless refugees leaving Yemen in desperation.
Mm-hmm. And of course, Egypt. We now know, I think, to a very large extent, the results of the election. It's not good to see them. For someone like myself who thought maybe democracy will bring about a modern, progressive Egypt, the contrary is the case.
Well, more news again. Today, the lower house, the important house in Egypt, convened for the first time since the overthrow of Mubarak, and 3/4 of the seats are held, 72% of the seats are held by the Islamists, different shades of Islamists. And the conventional interpretation is that this is a reflection of the Egyptian popular will. I say no. I say that this is election fraud. If there were elections in Syria, would you take them seriously? If there were elections in Russia, did you take them seriously? No. These are highly manipulated numbers, and the goal here is for the military, which has been in power for 60 years now, to stay in power. And how better to do it than to have this Islamist eruption? Because we in the West and many Egyptians are going to say, well, you know, the military isn't that bad. If the alternative is these guys with long beards who want to apply the laws of Muhammad, maybe we can have the military a bit longer. And I think that's what's up here. I do not think this is a legitimate election. So I see this as a ploy.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because if we look at the composition of Egyptian society, there are some Christians who may reluctantly have voted for the Brotherhood, but most would not vote for an Islamic party of any flavour. There are many progressives in Egypt. If people have spent any time there, people who would never dream of voting for an Islamist party. If you take those numbers out of the equation, it would mean that every other person in the country would have had to vote for either the two major Islamist parties. I don't believe that.
Right, and in particular astonishing is that the Salafis, the guys with the long beards, the hardline extremists, that they out of nowhere got over 1/4 of the vote. I mean, this doesn't pass the laugh test. It's just not a serious result. So I differ with the consensus here. I don't think this should be taken as a reflection of Egyptian political attitudes.
As ever, a great pleasure, sir. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.